Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're so glad you could join us for today's webinar, Preparing for NIS2, Strengthening Cybersecurity Across the EU. My name is Rochelle Sikowski, and I'll be your host for today's session. We will be getting started in just a couple of minutes to give everyone a chance to log in. While we wait, I have a few housekeeping notes to share. First, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll share the recording along with additional resources in your inbox after the session. So no need to take frantic notes. We also encourage you to engage with us throughout today's discussion. If you have any questions for our speakers, feel free to drop them into the Q&A panel at any time. We'll have time at the end of the live Q&A and aim to get some of these questions answered. If you're just joining us, welcome. Grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and get ready for an insightful conversation about what NIS2 means now that it's fully in effect, and how you can strengthen your organization's cybersecurity posture to meet the directive's requirements. We've got a great session ahead, featuring expert insights from both the advisory and automation side of compliance. All right, I see some more folks logging in, so let's go ahead and get started. So on today's webinar, Preparing for NIS2, Strengthening Cybersecurity Across the EU, we have Rui Serrano, the Data Privacy Officer here at Inside Assurance. Rui, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, do I have to? Okay, so
just a blurb.
So as I am the Data Protection Officer at Inside Assurance, I've been working in data protection for 11 years now, and focused on not only the European Union legislation framework, but the legislation frameworks that are being enforced around the world. And then, of course, after that, other laws have been launched by the European Union that address other sectors. And given the fact that there is some mix or some integration, I have also dedicated myself to study them and to assist companies with their implementation. That's it.
Thank you. And also we have Martin Davis, Senior Audit Alliance Manager from Drata. Martin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Thanks to you both. So yeah, I'm Martin, ex-PwC SOC 1, SOC 2 auditor. A lot of experience with things like GDPR, ISO, and of course now NIS2 and DORA and some of these frameworks that are popping up. At Drata, we are a compliance automation platform. We acknowledge that you can't get 100% of everything done in a compliance automation platform, which is why I'm here, which is why we work with Inside Assurance in various different ways, but making sure that you can have an independent assessment or audit or some kind of hands-on support where necessary for frameworks like NIS2, which we'll dive into a bit more as we talk through this presentation. But pleasure to be here today.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys. And now let's go over what we will be covering today. So today we're going to be talking about what is NIS2 and who's impacted, key obligations and penalties, readiness roadmap, what to do, how Insight and Drata can support your compliance journey. And then at the end, we'll have a key takeaways, and then we'll have the Q&A session. So without further ado, I will give you guys the baton and take over from now. I'll see you later.
Very good. Well, maybe one thing that is in order is to speak a little bit about what this entire thing of NIS2 is. So there was an NIS1 per se, and the goal of NIS2 is to ensure that the critical services within the European Union are resilient, and the entire landscape, the entire ecosystem is able to govern itself in an adequate manner and to sustain any potential attacks or vulnerabilities. There is a sister law that you may have heard of, which is called DORA, and DORA applies to the financial sector, whereas NIS2 applies to the other critical sectors of activity. So we have under NIS2 the split between essential entities and important entities. Sometimes this makes a little confusion, but there is not that much to be worried or confused about. So the difference is that essential entities potentially cause a bigger disruption or present a potential risk of a bigger disruption on the European market per se than important entities. So for instance, a hospital is an essential entity, whereas the postal services are an important entities, because if you don't get mail, it is severe, but if the hospital is not working at all, then it is extremely serious. So as in essential entities, we have power grids, airlines, railways, banks, and financial market, although, as I've told you, there is a DORA for the financial sector, a specific law, drinking water, distribution systems, and then stuff or things like postal services, waste management. Those are not considered essential, but important. So there is yet another small difference that is important for everybody to be aware of, is that DORA is a regulation, whereas NIS2 is a directive. And what is the difference? So the difference is that regulations, meaning DORA, directly applies across European Union member states, period. Whereas directives have to be transposed into local legislation, so they don't have a direct application, unless, and this is now waving off the focus, but unless a member state does not meet the deadline to implement it, which was October 2024, when the NIS2 became enforceable. So then there could be a decision from the European Union to make a directive or to accept that the directive is now enforceable, although that is not the logic. Regulations are directly affected, are directly to be observed. Directives need to be transposed, but I've spoken too much. Please, Martin, help me here.
No, I think that's really useful narrative, Rui, especially for people on the call who are confused about, whether they might be in scope. I think a good question to answer for them is, how do you determine whether you're in scope for NIS2? So Rui, you pointed out since NIS1, the predecessor, which, there's been various improvements on that. There's reasons why that didn't work. But here we are in the present. We don't care about NIS1 anymore. It's NIS2. So if you are in if you look up, there's Annex 1 and Annex 2 sectors, where in the NIS2 directive, it lists out what Rui was talking about: transportation, energy, waste, pharmaceuticals, financial infrastructure. If you fall into one of these sectors, there's a chance that you'll be in scope. The next question you need to ask yourself, if you are in one of those sectors in Annex 1 or Annex 2, is whether or not you have either more than 50 employees, or you have a turnover of over, I believe it's 2 million euro a year. Then again, you are in scope regardless. Now, if you're not in one of those critical sectors, or you don't meet the 50 employee or turnover threshold, there is still a chance that you are, I believe it's in Article 2, a exception entity, where you are still so important to the functioning of society and its infrastructure that you are still deemed by your local regulator to be an in-scope entity. So, for conversations like that, this is why we work with Insight Assurance, so you can sleep easier at night and lean on their expertise to kind of understand the extent of whether you will be in scope. But once you've identified that you're in scope, the provisions of the NIS2 directive apply the exact same. Now, as Rui was pointing out, depending on what member state you're in the EU, that member state may or may not have yet ratified the NIS2 directive into local law. So some countries are lagging behind, others are further ahead. But the question might arise, okay, how will NIS2 impact me differently if I'm in Italy versus in Germany? And that is a question that is good to work with Insight Assurance on. But broadly speaking, it's the same. It's going to be the same provisions. It's about supply chain security, risk management, business continuity, various policies and governance mechanisms, which we'll dive into in some more detail. But the only difference from one member state to the next might be just the way that you report incidents as required by NIS2 to your regulator. So be that the format, the who it is that you reach out to, what information you include. But broadly speaking, you know, it is in every member state's interest to make sure NIS2 is kind of implemented in a very similar way from one country to the next. So while there is potential for slight differences between member states, they won't be sufficiently large that it's a completely different exercise from one member state to the next. So what we'll talk to you about today will apply whether or not, regardless of what member state that you happen to be in.
Can we jump to the next one?
Yes, yeah, we'll jump to the next one. I think, Rui, the one point as well, just on that last slide. So we talked about jurisdiction. Obviously, if you're an EU member state, it expands beyond that. If you are outside of the EU, but you are servicing customers that are based in the EU, you still fall within this scope and this question of, you know, whether you're critical or important. So just important to note that as well. But yeah, thanks, Rui.
So to Martin's point, some of you in the call may have heard that not too long ago, I believe it was 1 month or a couple of months ago, there was a big blackout in terms of energy in the Iberian Peninsula. Okay, so Martin mentioned that besides essential and important entities, there are some cases where other entities may be considered within scope. I don't want to get there in detail, but a power grid has several components. You have water dams, you have nuclear power plants, you have windmills, you have ocean generated electricity. So when a power grid suffers severe fluctuations or blackouts, then it is like a balancing exercise to set up everything again in pure order so that there are no overloads or no gaps and everything falls down crumbling again. So a company, for instance, that does the maintenance to the windmills, it's considered a critical entity because on those circumstances, they need to properly get in line with the workflow and set things in motion in the right way. Otherwise, we get into a cycle of blackouts after blackouts. This is just an example. But if you are a provider that delivers a critical software tool, for instance, or a service or an IT outsourcing service to an essential entity like an hospital, so you are located in Argentina, not the European Union, but you have the full servers, exchange, network, outsourcing remotely of a chain of private hospitals in the European Union. Yeah, you are not directly in scope, but you are in scope given the fact that your client, that chain of hospitals, is liable for your services. So you will get an NIS2 addendum to commit to with SLAs and response times and reposition times and to show that you are complying with the law because the client is the one liable for whatever you do. So following up on what Martin was saying, there is a direct applicability to some organizations in the EU, yes, but it doesn't stop there. If you are part of the ecosystem, it is very likely, if you are a critical provider, that you will have to comply with NIS2 also. And if you operate in the financial sector, with DORA. And of course, you have to comply with the GDPR if you want to comply with either. So it is the ecosystem in the European Union. Now, specifically, what is NIS2 and DORA? I'm always speaking about the sister laws. What are they worried about? Resilience. Okay, so you need to have cybersecurity in place. You need to have proper governance over your critical providers. You need to be on top of them, not only having done a proper due diligence to begin with, but monitoring them, making sure that they inform you in advance if they raise or find vulnerabilities in their IT landscape, in their operation, whatever, so that those could be preemptively mitigated. These laws aim to avoid incidents, not to address them. If you want to address incidents, you have ITIL, you have ISO, you have that stuff, which are frameworks. These laws aim to make the entire ecosystem safer from a preemptive standing point. Martin, please.
Yeah, so that's exactly why the European Union has set up these information sharing mechanisms, because like we were saying, the whole point of this directive isn't just to impose compliance for the sake of imposing compliance. It's to make sure that we can constantly learn and exercise those muscles that make us as a union stronger and more protected against state-sponsored, increasingly sophisticated cyber attacks. So this is why I think it was a really good point that you raised, Rui. If you're not directly in scope for NIS2, based on the kind of decision tree that we were talking about before, whether you fall into these Annex 1 or 2 sectors and whether you have more than 50 employees, what we're seeing at Drata, and what is the case across the private kind of markets right now, is if you're providing anyone with a service that and they're in scope for NIS2, they are basically going to impose the same requirements on you that are on them. So they're going to make sure that you have your own business continuity plan, that you have your own user access reviews, controls in place, so that they can gain comfort that you're doing the right thing. And it becomes more than compliance. It becomes actually a revenue generating exercise when you implement these controls, because you're showing to the market, I can be trusted with your information, with your data. Here's some different perhaps certificates to prove it, or if not, come take a look behind the scenes at what we have going on. So it's as much about communicating what you're doing to the market when you're not directly in scope for NIS2, as it is, when you are in scope for NIS2, actually kind of being compliant. But if we move on a little bit, just talking about the specific requirements. So first, we have these cybersecurity risk management controls. Rui already talked about these. Going through your list of vendors, classifying them based on the risk level, and kind of understanding, simulating different exercises. What if this vendor were to go down? What would we do then? And documenting all of this. This is going to prove to your regulator and to your supply chain that you have thought well about these kinds of things. The next big one is incident reporting. So this 24-hour timeline that you see, this is the early warning timeline. So you have to notify, first of all, you have to find out who in your member state is what's called the CCERT, or the relevant authority that needs to receive this information within 24 hours. But in summary, you're to report that incident and tell them how you identified that it was an incident. Next, within 72 hours of the incident occurring, you provide what's called the formal notification. So it's following up, understanding the severity, how many people were affected, how many systems were affected, and communicating that to the same authority. After that, you have 30 days to issue the final report, wherein hopefully the issue has been resolved fully and you've outlined how you've resolved it and how you will prevent it from occurring again. But if it has not been resolved fully, the steps that have been taken and that will be taken to fully resolve it. So those are quite important in the context of NIS2 if you are directly in scope. Rui, maybe if you want to talk about kind of monitoring and managing that third-party risk on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, so it's about showing that you have proper supplier governance, that you are aware of your suppliers, you are aware of their weak points. Everybody has a weak point. You are supportive enough of them to assist, but also demanding enough to require them within feasible timelines that they mitigate whatever vulnerabilities they have, and that they commit to inform you in advance, preemptively, in a timely manner, if they foresee that they will have issues, or if they have found a vulnerability, or if they foresee they will have a service disruption next month, whatever, because they will be short on manpower. I'm just making this up, but you need to establish a close governance relationship with your critical providers, because nowadays we all know that companies do no longer have their own data centers, their own dedicated teams for everything. There is a wide outsourcing and segregation of duties within organizations, which is healthy, which is good, but it requires awareness and governance. It cannot be that, oh, we trust those guys, we never met them, but they have worked fine for the next 3 months, so they are good. No, we need to be on top of that. And a very important thing that Martin mentioned, you need to involve your procurement department, and you need to have backup plans. So if this provider goes rogue, who can I hire within which time frame to replace it? Is that a big problem? Because I will need 3 months to do that. Okay, then we need to look at that in detail. Well, it's not that much of a big problem. It will have some financial impact, but we can do it overnight. Okay, the risk is low. Okay, and this means that like anything in life, when it comes to legislation, there are penalties. Okay, so the European Union has been known not to issue penalties just because. Although you may have heard that under the GDPR, Facebook got a penalty of whatever millions. Yeah, those companies get penalties because they don't care. Maybe their revenue compensates the fact that they breached the law and they pay the penalty and they move on. That has not been the philosophy within the European Union. The European Union usually assists, provides support, explaining what needs to be amended, gives a reasonable timeline for it to be done, and the penalties show up when companies purely disregard or don't care or seem not to be capable of complying with the law. But the thresholds are very high. So in this case, we are either at 10 million euros or 2% of global revenue. So it's not a walk in the park if you decide just not to care about these laws. Okay.
Absolutely. I think as well on beyond the financial impact, the reputation repercussions that stays with a company, and that can often be even bigger than the direct financial impact. It can take years to wash off the reputation of being known as someone who has breached NIS2, because again, it's that contagion risk. Who will want to work with you if you've already been shown to not be managing your own internal security posture correctly? And I think even taking it a step further, the NIS2 directive introduces personal liability on directors and the board and the managers of companies. So compared to NIS1, it's quite serious now from both the perspective of an entity who is in scope for NIS2 directly, but also those who are working with them. So the impacts are quite severe. So people are taking this quite seriously.
Very good. So, what is the process to get there? So first of all, let me speak about the relevancy of my dearest partner, Drata, here in the person of Martin. So you need tools. You need tools to undergo your path, and you need tools to document your compliance and to be aware of any open points and any non-compliance points that need to be mitigated, and to schedule and address those mitigation actions. Drata is a platform that will allow you and will guide you and will support you and coach you through the process. And it will allow you in the future to have documented proof of compliance. These are pieces of legislation that, although some of them foresee a certification mechanism, year to date there is none. The GDPR since 2016 foreseen a certified mechanism. There is no certified mechanism, no official certified mechanism under the GDPR. There are some entities in Europe, like TÜV from Germany, that are accepted as a certification that is valid, but it's not an official certification. NIS2, DORA, and other pieces of legislation, you don't get to be certified. So you need to be able to show in a documented manner that you have done your assessment, you have raised existing non-compliance points, you have mitigated them, you have implemented adequate contractual, operational, and technological measures, and now you operate, or you strongly believe you operate in a compliant manner. So the logic of the process is always the same. We live in the 21st century, we have IT, we have AI, so that is IT, cyber security, and AI related topics. By the way, there is also the AI Act in the EU and the ISO 42000 for the rest of the world. Let's put it like that, although ISO, of course, is not a law. And then you have your operational side. How do you ensure that your operation is resilient? How do you ensure that in a hospital, and just one example, if you have 3 surgery rooms and you have a certain volume of patients, that potentially will not be enough and it could create problems. This is just one minor example. And how do you ensure that your providers, the guys that do the PET scans at the hospital, which is not the hospital but a provider, they will be there and they will not go on holiday and then there is no way to do a PET scan to a patient, whatever. And I'm just now speaking about the operational side, not the IT security or the contractual side. And then that you have proper governance on contracts with those providers, to whom the law also applies, although not directly. So the role that Drata plays in this is to be there, is to have a safe harbor that you can reference to. You will have your information there. You can assess at any time where you stand. You can assess proof that you comply. The role of a partner like Inside Assurance is to walk you through the the finish line, because it is acceptable that you are not versed in the law. So we will walk you through the finish line by a common way while you are working on Drata, and we will make sure that we do it in a systematic way so you get to the finish line with a successful outcome. Martin, please. I'm getting voiceless now.
No, look, I fully agree. So if you take a look at what this journey could look like, I suppose, in a manual world, there's so many different moving parts. There's different stakeholders. There's the procurement team, there's the IT team, there's the CISO, there's first line risk, chief risk officer, vendor owners, risk owner. There's so many different people and so many tasks that have to be done that trying to manage that manually, you're going to find yourself spending 20% of the total time just doing administrative work, asking people to get things done, following up with people, trying to get the most up-to-date version of a risk register. I know that because I've been there before. When you have a tool where you centralize this information, you assign tasks to the right people. You know, there's so many benefits that the tool has from the automation of evidence side of things. But I really think when it comes to NIS2, it's the fact that you can have everything in one place. The vendor risks are the golden source of truth for those vendor risks. There's a golden source of truth for whether the user access review has been done. You don't lose time figuring out whether things have been done. You see that they're there, you sleep easy. And to top it all off, you now have a place where you can demonstrate to your regulators or your customers via the dashboarding, the reporting, and the AI due diligence questionnaire functionality. Yes, we are doing these things. Yes, we can be worked with. Look at our system. Look at all the effort we've put into it. You know, again, as Rui said, it is not proof or it's not a certificate of compliance, but it is the best possible way of doing it right now until maybe a NIS2 audit framework comes out. Maybe it doesn't. So it's centralizing all the information and madness that is associated with frameworks like NIS2 in one place. And of course, there's a good chance, especially for people on the call, that you're already working towards ISO 27001. You're already working towards SOC 2. That's great. Drata will show you there's certain controls that you do for SOC 2 and ISO and for NIS2. Let's take user access reviews as an easy example. Do them once and have it be evidenced for each of the frameworks. You're not duplicating work. you can, you don't have to interpret the complex requirements of each framework, because Drata has done that for you. We've said these are the controls you need to implement in order to be compliant. Now, again, where we would suggest you work with Insight is where it comes to things like business continuity, disaster recovery. We can give you guidance on what a policy might look like, but every business is so unique. Your information security kind of policy and incident reporting structure, that's going to vary massively from one business to the next. There's no automation tool that should try to fully automate those kinds of things. So that's where it's the perfect match, when you use a tool and an auditor, and you'll find it to be much more efficient than any other alternative. So here again, yeah, look, we talk about the partnership, right? And it's not just, Drata as a tool is quite easy to log in. My dear mother would be able to log into Drata if she needed to. It's really about the understanding of what's behind the scenes. Again, NIS2 is a directive. SOC 2 is kind of worded in a way that's vague, and in my opinion, for the right reason. But it's worded in a way that's vague and might be unclear to someone who's looking at this for the first time. What controls should I implement here? It's not really giving me clear advice. Inside Assurance have worked with so many of our customers that they understand not just how to log in. As I said, anyone can do that, but the kind of evidence, the spirit of how we map controls to these requirements. There's a common understanding of how we do that. So yeah, I don't know, Rui, if you had anything else to add there.
Yeah, maybe some typical questions, which is how long will this take? Of course, the timeline for you to do your adequacy process depends on your size. And the size, it's not the number of employees or the number of clients that you have, is the size of your operation that will impact the ecosystem that you reside in. So remember the guys that do the maintenance to windmills. If the country like the Netherlands, it's 80% based on windmills, then yeah, it's severe. If it's a country like Portugal that has like a 10% windmill park, it's not going to be that much. But the core requirements are still there. And then there are some potential complexity factors, like how dependent are you on third-party providers, and where are they? Are they in Europe? Are they outside of Europe? Are they outside of European countries that just don't care because they have so many clients that, come on, the effort to comply with this new additional law doesn't pay off. So there are some potential complexity factors to be involved, but typically we can walk you through the process within 3 months, let's say, and then you have a 1-year time period to solidify and to get in a proper compliant mode of operation per se. So that is in average what could be expected. Of course, if we are speaking about a big critical entity, it will be much more. What we aim to do is to coach you and to go along with you through your journey on a work platform like Drata. Okay. Yeah, I believe this is the point. Of course, then you will have to have your team trained on the new or amended processes and policies, because it's not enough to become compliant. You need to operate in a compliant manner.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why I think it's again, we're a tool. We do everything that we need to do as a tool by providing guidance on policies. But ultimately, a policy by itself is useless. It needs to be communicated. It needs to be trained. There needs to be governance. People need to care about what's in that policy and then breathe life into it by operating it day in and day out. And I think, to your point, Rui, we also get the question a lot, how long will it take to be NIS2 compliant? It's how long is a piece of string? It really depends. If I think one indicator that it will be quicker is if you already have something like ISO or SOC 2 in place, or you've already, the EBA or the FCA even in the UK has its own kind of operational resilience requirements. which mandates some form of incident identification and reporting. If you have, it's like a muscle. If you've already got some of that muscle trained, retraining it for NIS2 isn't that much more. There are slight differences, and you need to make sure you cover those slight differences. But if you're already doing incident reporting, user access reviews, backup validation and testing, you're doing a lot of the things that NIS2 will require you to do. It's just about understanding where you're doing those things correctly. So yeah, I think the only other thing I would add then is, a lot of people on this call are probably inundated with DDQs, with due diligence questionnaires, especially in light of NIS2. And as Rui pointed out before, the EU AI Act, every legal team is now making sure that their buying department is kicking the tires of whoever they're buying from, because they don't want that risk anymore, and nor should they. So I think it's good that happens, but I think it's a problem for a lot of companies that they have so many due diligence questionnaires that take hours and hours of time and money effectively to answer. So that's where a tool like SafeBase, which we work with here at Drata, is massively important as well in this context.
Yeah, the other day I was doing a prior assessment for a company under NIS2, and they got a question. They are, let's say, and I'm sorry, I'm using words that are from other laws because the lexicon, like critical ICT provider, this comes from DORA. They are a critical ICT provider of an important entity, an essential entity. And they got a questionnaire from one of their clients, one of those essential entities, an IT and cybersecurity questionnaire that had only 420 questions. So what is the time and effort to reply to that client, and then maybe next week to the next client? So if you have your documentation in order, if you have your proof of compliance within a platform, within Drata, for instance, you can always tell your client, okay, you are asking me something with questions in a different order, but we have the documentation here that proves what you need to know. So I do apologize, I'm not answering your questionnaire because here is the information that you require. That takes 10 minutes, opposite to, in some cases, maybe 10 days, because those questionnaires in many cases imply that you have to speak with somebody from another department and somebody from another department, so on. So it's a nightmare, okay? Just to make this summary.
Absolutely right. And I think where we try and bridge that gap with SafeBase, exactly like you said, is using AI to read through your documents, your policies, your pen test results, and use that information to respond to questions, and also tell you where the source of that information or that answer was found. So you don't have to worry that it's going to completely hallucinate an answer that's going to get you in trouble later on. It'll tell you this is where we found that answer, but you're not going through 420 questions. You're going through maybe 400, and there are 20 which the AI can't responsibly answer, but you've already saved yourselves, over 80-90% of the time there. So key takeaways, NIS2 is live, right? Now there are still countries, there are still member states that are lagging behind. But if you're operating in a member state that has already ratified NIS2, or you're servicing from outside of the EU or that member state into that country that has ratified NIS2, it's live. You need to be compliant with these kinds of things, and being able to evidence it as well. Gaps, you will have some gaps. If you're doing ISO 27001, ENISA, which is the authority in the EU that kind of created NIS2, ENISA based NIS2 off ISO 27001. That does not mean that if you're ISO 27001 compliant, that you can say, I'm NIS2 compliant, great, I don't even need to do anything. It does mean you're going to be a lot of the way there, but there's a difference there, and those are the gaps. So really do an exercise to understand, with a tool that supports you like Drata, what you have in place and what you don't have in place. Focus on what you don't have in place, and get some steer, get some buy-in from management and the board, because it is ultimately their responsibility as well to help you address those gaps. Be it, that perhaps there's some funding that is required, or some reallocation of resources to focus on perhaps your business continuity plan. But make sure that the board is really bought into this and is, pushing for these actions to be completed. Framework alignment as well. A lot of what is being asked by NIS2 exists in other frameworks. Don't do work twice where you don't have to. It doesn't help anyone. I personally, when we talk about compliance as an overhead or as a cost, I disagree. I think compliance is a value add. I think it is revenue generating, but I do agree that there are perhaps certain activities within the broader expense line item in a financial statement that has to do with compliance that can be reduced. So that is on things like duplicating efforts, manual administrative tasks. Really prove to your board compliance is generating revenue here. Yeah, it's never been the most interesting or kind of dynamic thing to present, compared to things like AI or other kind of things. But it is starting to become more and more of a revenue generating function. It is something I truly believe.
Let me step in just for 1 second to give a very blunt example of what you said. And this has been so many years that, and come on, I'm not going to share any confidential information. I'm associated with a lawyer's office here in Portugal. And when one of our clients at the lawyer's office, they run an industry. And we have warned them that given the fact that it's an industry that has individual customers, natural persons as customers, they must, at that point in time, back 8 years ago, they had to become GDPR compliant and to take care of other stuff. And they basically said something like, okay, we already pay you enough fee as lawyers and you just want money, and it's a waste of money to become compliant with this BS laws and regulations that most likely next year will no longer be in place, whatever, and so on. They rumbled about, and then they decided to install some internal video surveillance cameras facing the entry doors to the water closets because they felt that some employees spent too much time in the water closet. So then they got an audit, and they had a 50,000 euro penalty to pay just for that, plus another penalty for not having done anything about the GDPR. So if we come to think about that, it would not have been a bad idea at all to do the proper thing in the proper timeline.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, Martin.
I think it's a solid example, Rui. I think it really, whenever you hear examples like this, it's always after the thing happens, and then the fine is imposed. That's when it was like, oh, why didn't we do anything about this? And then you have the poor GRC team going, we were trying, we really were. And, look, I get it. I think it takes a bit of experience and time to see why compliance is actually revenue generating. But, when you see it, it becomes a concept of reputational risk as well. I really, honestly, I don't know, I'm getting quite deep into this now and emotional almost, but I believe, it's a marketing tool. If you can prove that your product or your system or your ISMS, whatever it may be, is secure, is robust, it puts your company in a new light. All else equal, you're always going to go for the company who takes itself seriously, takes security seriously, and wants to mitigate risks compared to one that isn't. It's really a marketing tool in this day and age. But I think just to round off this slide that we're on here, advisory support really accelerates all of this. There is a lot that a tool will do. There is a lot that a tool will guide you on. There's a lot of time that the tool will save you on some of these administrative tasks. And if you're ever willing to explore that a bit more, our contact details will be shared on these slides soon. But there is always a crucial component, which is that human element to understand, on various different things, get coached through, like Rui mentioned, on some of the things which are not and should not be automated. A vendor risk assessment, there are elements that can be automated perhaps, but it takes subjective interpretation, analysis, calibration of risk thresholds to really do that responsibly. And that's where insight come in, of course. We have a question in the Q&A here.
Yeah.
from Simon, who asks, is there a surefire way of knowing if one's company is under NIS2 and to easily demonstrate this to a board that obviously will challenge the position since the penalties seem so threatening? So I think, Rui, yeah, do you want to
Yeah.
perhaps start on this one?
So there, of course, if you are considered under the law an entity towards which NIS2 applies, there is no arguing about it. If you are an healthcare provider, if you are a railway infrastructure services provider, if you are listed as a company that is within scope, there is no arguing about that. The gray area becomes not so much in direct first line critical ICT providers. So like the company that has the full IT outsourcing of the hospital, that is also easy to demonstrate. But in some cases, if you are, for instance, and this is just an example that popped out my head, if you have created an AI agentics tool, so a tool that combines several AI instances and allows you to create agents to streamline some operational functions within organizations, and you are selling that service through a critical ICT provider to an entity that is within scope. So this makes things apparently a little bit gray, but then the exercise you have to do is, if my agents have an issue, either an IT security or cybersecurity issue, or if they stop, if they don't perform as they should, what is the impact to the end client? What is the impact to that hospital? Will it potentially stop the hospital? Will it potentially provoke a severe incident? So if that is the case, you are in scope, because you are a major potential risk factor to the market. And that is the argumentation that needs to be built. And there is no way to refute that. And you will be asked by that client through your provider to become compliant with NIS2. So again, we have the AI agentics provider that delivers services through a partner to an hospital. The hospital will ask the partner to make sure that the partner and all of its critical providers comply, and you will receive the request. Now, in advance, you should be aware of this, not then to be forced to run after prejudice and to do things hastily. So the best advice I can give you is, if you are having issues with demonstrating to your board of management that your organization is within scope, although not directly, you should get someone like ourselves or Drata that can help you to show in a demonstrable manner why you are in scope. Because again, you may not be, but you may be in scope, and you may be at a severe risk while not being fully aware of it. I don't know if I've answered your question, Simon.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, I've just dropped a link into the chat, Simon, and that has reference. If you go to that, you'll see that we're talking about Annex 1 and Annex 2 sectors. If you are operating in one of those sectors, which you'll be able to find in that link, and then you are above 50 employees, it's pretty much a certainty that you are going to be in scope for NIS2 if you're operating within the EU or you're servicing any EU member states. Beyond that, there's whether you're important or essential, but it doesn't really matter, because it's the same provisions that you have to comply with regardless. So if you're in one of these sectors, you're above 50 staff, you're going to be in scope. That's where I would really suggest a tool like Drata. If you want to demonstrate to your board that you are compliant, Drata's dashboarding has all the controls that are mapped to NIS2 and a lot of automation for some of them. But where you have provided evidence that a control has been completed and is operating, and that control relates to NIS2, you can have a single PDF dashboard that you can show to your board or to your stakeholders, your customers, that shows we are doing these things, we are compliant with NIS2. And to be completely honest with you, compared to like a SOC 2 or an ISO 27001, there's less work involved. But as you point out, Simon, the penalties are just that much more severe. So it is, there is that factor to it. So that would be my advice to you, Simon. The appendix, can you repeat the appendix? I think so. That's just another question from Joseph here before we finish up. The appendix, so Annex 1, Annex 2 within the NIS2 Directive. If you give it a quick Google, you will find entities which fall under Annex 1 or Annex 2. If you're in one of those entities and above 50 staff, it's pretty likely that you'll be in scope for NIS2. Of course, that's where we'd recommend you reach out to Insight to get some more answers.
Maybe let me get the elephant out of the room per se. I'm going to give you an example under the GDPR, not under NIS2, but it serves the purpose of a company that is within scope, period, although they don't meet the invoicing or the revenue or the staff thresholds. And this is a real case. We have here locally a client which has a team of 5 people, only 5 employees, but they do accounting, they do loans, they do several other stuff like getting criminal records for people and so on, which is all about extremely sensitive information about people. So although they don't meet those theoretical thresholds that the law determines, I don't believe there are that many more companies within scope of the GDPR, given the fact that they process extremely sensitive personal data about lots of people. So under NIS2, under DORA, under the AI Act, whatever, it's the same thing. So you may not have more than 50 employees, you may not have a revenue higher than whatever, but if you are that company of 5 people that if something goes wrong, you will stop an essential company under NIS2, you are in scope, period. No question about
it. We just have one more question here from Destiny. Is there a medium we can use to understand how Drata works? Destiny, if you see the email address on the screen there, if you just want to send me an email, we're always happy to do demos, trials, show you what the use case would be in your specific scenario for NIS2. So feel free to send me an email and we can chat about that further. Otherwise, I think that's all the questions we had. Anything else? Obviously, reach out to both of us, myself or Rui. But Rochelle, I think you wanted to say a couple of words.
No, you guys covered basically all of it. Thank you, everybody, for attending our webinar. Like Martin was mentioning, if you have any questions to either of our entities, Inside Assurance or Drata, our contact information is here. And would be more than happy to help answer any questions. We're partners in crime here, and we work very well collaboratively. So it is a win-win situation. It doesn't matter who you reach out to, you'll get the right information. If there's no other questions, then I guess I will let everybody go and we'll wrap it up 5 minutes early. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers, Rochelle. Cheers, Rui. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Martin.
Bye.